Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone. Today our group consists of me, Naili Mufidah, Yunika Maulida, Fitri Maulidia Hayati, Ria Anjani, and Alif Wildan Susilo. Today we will read our summary result. Part 3, Researching Literature in Language Education. The first one is qualitative research. Qualitative research is likely to be a particularly effective approach to social and affective issues in IELLE. Qualitative research, sometimes known as naturalistic research. Qualitative research is flexible and not dogmatically tied to any single method. Nevertheless, certain methods are likely to be a part of such naturalistic inquiry. Here are qualitative research typical methods. The first one is observation, interviews, analysis of text and document, interest in narratives, conversation analysis, and discourse analysis. The reason for the growing preference for qualitative research in education then is a recognition of the irreducibly local and situational nature of educational interaction between students and teachers, between teachers and students, and books and material and other resources, and all of this in particular institutional and cultural contexts. Qualitative research should always attempt to gain insider participant perspective on data and interpretation they are developing. The second is action research. AR involves participant, values participant perspective, and accepts the importance of local circumstances and contexts which an outside researcher can never be as aware of or aware in the same ways. AR has traditionally been sort of a spiral of activities. Its process begins with a general idea. The general idea encourages surveillance of the field and finding fact. After conducting the initial reconnaissance, the researchers decided on a general plan of action. The general plan is broken down into achievable steps. The first step, the researchers become careful and monitors the effect of the first. After this has been evaluated and revised, then a second action step can be planned together with the appropriate monitoring procedures. AR, more or less prospectively defined, has been a key to much effective educational practitioner research. IR is qualitative in orientation, can be pursued using the kind of methods and technique outlined in Chapter 7. Okay, now we move to the Chapter 7. It's about research method for literature in language education with examples. This chapter outlines features and the relative strengths and weaknesses of the research method used to study literature in language education using example studies. This chapter therefore proceeds broadly from the more controlled and experimental to more qualitative naturalistic and action research-oriented method, and some likely methods for investigating various aspects of literature in language education are listed below. Here are the methods of data collection. The first one is think out loud protocol or free writing. The second is diaries, journals, and then verbal or written recalls, cute recalls, interviews, questionnaires, field notes, observation of places or individuals, individual reading behavior, control experiment, case studies, and triangulation of some of the above.
Okay, the next is experimental research. Experimental research, strictly conceived, is difficult for most of us to carry out in the ordinary course of duty because of the need for strict controls. Normally, experimental purity is bound at the expense of the ecological validity on which qualitative research places a high premium. You could try to neutralize this effect by having four groups with something version 1 before 2 and vice versa, but things are already spinning out of the realms of practicality for most of our timetables. The experimental heading is nevertheless included here more as a reminder that there are times when it can be at least suggestive to quantify and to try to isolate the effects of changing single or combined variables on a situation. Next, experimental research example. Treat readers as an input medium in L2 learning. The argument is that extended and enjoyable exposure to natural language in context promote language acquisitions. Methodology. The key difference between the two groups was that the experimental group was in a rural area and the control group in an urban area. The result is readers showed a marked preference for titles well within or below their language proficiency levels, and some of their simplified or restricted structures seem to have been enthusiastically and creatively taken into their own language. The value of extensive reading is endorsed by this as in other studies, but the experiment also seems to point to the needs for material and activities to encourage acquisition of more demanding language. Further research or revisits may reveal that relative advantages were quickly lost. There may have been novelty effect of being an experimental group with a respected teacher. The protocol is this methodology arguably uses unnatural means or interventions, but to access more ecologically valid mental processes, as the quotation from Alderson suggests, protocol can be a useful way to identify which parts or features of a text being read are noticed by different individuals and or cause difficulty. Despite the possible reservations, the methodology potentially gives rich information about individuals as well as groups and could be explored more than it has been for literature reading, research into classroom interaction around literary texts in groups, and often involving a teacher. Similarly, interviews could follow up a practical recording sessions to explore retrospective interpretation or memories of the reading event. Thought the practical transcript should be analyzed in the first instance for what it says rather than can be read into it. There is a lot of information in retrospective reports aside from the words themselves. Research need to be aware of these parallel signal systems and be prepared to include them in their analysis. Verbal reports of automatic process are not possible. Research will be based on a model of mental process that allow predictions about how mental operations will be organized under various conditions.
Protocols. Survey research will be used to find out relatively factual information about a situation. Some numbers and statistics seem inevitable in such work. This may be descriptive, although we should always be careful about claims, implicit or explicit, to avoid interpretive work. Destination: to explore the reasons for the consistent survey findings across various teaching situations that modern foreign language students are unsure of the value of the literal, even though their teacher seems to be. Methodology: the research subject were 35 women and 10 men in South Australia. Results: the students very clearly signaled an interest in everyday speaking speech in French, although they are also interested. Case study that remains the most highly respected example.
I want to explain about case studies.
Case studies can be useful for longitudinal research, like skills development, professional development, implementation of language planning or policies in a state or institution. There are strengths and weaknesses about case study. Strengths. The first is the results are more easily understood by a reader audience. And then they are immediately intelligible. And the next is they catch unique features. And then they are strong on reality. And then they provide insight into similar situations and cases. The next is they can be undertaken by a single researcher without needing a full research team. The last is they can embrace and build in unexpected events and uncontrolled variables. Weaknesses. The first is the result may not be generalizable except where other readers or researchers see their application. The second, they are not easily open to cross-checking. And then, they are prone to problems to observer bias. So, there are positive features of case study. The first is it shows what features are possible and need to be taken account of in any generalization. The next is it may be used to refute a generalization as only one case is necessary for this purpose. The last is it may be a useful source of hypothesis. Case study research is one of the most attractive styles of research for the first-time researcher. It is less formal than in other kinds of study, and case study researchers always have ready participants in themselves, their children, and their friends. Case study example: Norton B. and Van der Heyden K. Comic book culture and second language learners. The summary of this research is some students in a Canadian elementary school selected for its culturally diverse students. 25 of these students were English language learners speaking another language at home. 13 of the second language learners were found to be keen readers of arty comic books. Interview revealed that these students felt the comics taught them useful English language but also gave them cultural insights. So, the aims are to gain insight into the appeal of arty comics to these learners, and then consider the literacy development of the arty reader. And next, to understand social networking of arty readers. Methodology. After distribution of questionnaires to all 57 participants, 10 of the arty readers were interviewed at school. Interviews were tape recorded and lasted about 30 minutes each. Interviewers used set prompts for the semi-structured interview. Do you think arty comics are helpful in English learning? Do you read comics in your home language? Should you allow to read arty comics during silent reading? Do you talk about arty comics with your friends? Do arty comics tell you anything about Canadian society? The result, arty comics appeal because they are funny and entertaining, including puns and jokes. Students also found that they have gave insight into Canadian society. For the further research, the case is nevertheless a subjective one, and these are followed up as the authors themselves promise in part. The research, for example, into the use of comics, the field of new literacies, including the uses by young people of fanzines, magazines, and so on, through the manifestation of popular culture such as soap opera, stories on TV, and popular press, but also gave them cultural insights. So, the aims are to gain insight into the appeal of arty comics to these learners, and then consider the literacy development of the arty reader. And next, to understand social networking of arty readers. Methodology. After
distribution of questionnaires to all 57 participants, 10 of the archie readers were interviewed at school. Interviews were tape recorded and last about 30 minutes each. Interviewers used exact prompts for the semi-structured interview. Do you think archie comics are helpful in English learning? Do you read comics in your home language? Should you allow to read archie comics during silent reading? Do you talk about archie comics with your friends? Do archie comics tell you anything about Canadian society? The result, archie comics appeal because they are funny and entertaining, including puns and jokes. Students also found that they have gave insight into Canadian society. For the further research, the case is nevertheless a subjective one, and these are followed up as the authors themselves promise in part. The research, for example, into the use of comics, the field of new literacies, including the uses by young people of fanzines, magazine, and so on, through the manifestation of popular culture such as soap opera, stories on TV, and popular press.
Example of the ethnography of applied linguistic heads mind concurs is which literacy of the example, the way different communicates tell story or take meaning from text, that the relationship of the relative educational gains or losses. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everybody, I'm Ranjani, my age student is 90. Now I will share my explanation about a book, and the title is Literature in Language Education by Jeff Hall on page 213 to 220. Okay. Carry out your own research project in IELLE. This chapter is proposed to help the readers to design and implement their research project in IELLE. In the context of literature in language education, the start point for research may be issue like my students are bored in literature classes, students are not doing extensive reading at home, students say the reading texts are too difficult, and is the stuff really relevant to the students' needs? Such issues, not confined to our classroom, can be the starting point for informed inquiries into more appropriate methodologies or syllabus specification or much else besides. What needs to be established first is who says or think what and what that might mean in the specific situations, bored, difficult, and not relevant. Grip and Stoller propose a useful 12-step basic plan for action research into reading, which can easily be applied to IELLE research situations. Okay, basic steps for action research. Okay, steps 1. Establish a purpose and decide on a topic. 2. Pose specific questions, narrowing the focus of inquiry. 3. Anticipate outcomes. 4. Specify the type of data to collect. 5. Determine ways to collect data. 6. Consider issues related to time. 7. Collect data systematically. 8. Examine and analyze data. 9. Reflect on results. 10. Generate practical solutions. 11. Experiment with solutions. And 12. Share insights with colleagues. The writers close with some brief general pointers to good practice in these areas. Okay, the first method 1, observation. Observing a literature lesson raises many useful teaching questions, which are easily seen also as legitimate research questions, in the sense that they could lead to better understanding of what might be going on in a literature lesson. Method 2 is interviews. Post-observation interviews could well be distracting and introduce irrelevant considerations. A more open positions would be to argue for the value of additional perspectives, even if it may be admit that asking someone what happened after the event will only click it a person without necessarily privilege truth status. Method 3 is analysis of text and documents. You may be analyzing one written documents to spoken interaction or transcripts, 3 non-linguistic data. And you need to keep careful records, facts, but also impressions and ideas. Analyze as you go along. Don't keep missing unanalyzed data or may find you have been collecting the wrong things. And 3, remember that 2 analyzers or researchers are always better than 1. Okay, that's for me. I'm so sorry if there are many mistakes. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Now, we move to 8.2 about some possible project for literature in IELLE. Here are the project topic and how to collect data. The project topic are syllabus, a literature lesson, case study, reading literature, attitudes to literature, literature as social practice, observation, interviews, and other triangulation. And how to collect data? There are textual analysis, document, observation, interviews, journals, protocol study, questionnaire, and ethnography.